what would it be like to sit down and talk with over 400 terrorists and extremists and victims and supporters and hostages and family members, all related to terror attacks? Be very fascinating. Too bad there has to be such a thing, but it would be fascinating to do. And Dr. Ann Speckhard, professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical School and author of Talking Terror, did just that, and she is with us. And hello, doctor, how are you?
Hi, Steve. The name of the book is Talking to Terrorists.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, I got misinformation, but there it is.
Right.
Talking to Terrorists. Thanks for the correction. I appreciate it. Okay, so how does what you did help you in trying to, I won't say understand, but interpret why these two brothers did what they did?
Well, Steve, it's really important that we do understand. And what I looked at when I was studying for 10 years, I chased terrorists all around the world. And I was trying to understand what motivated them, what are the factors that got them on the terrorist trajectory, and if we could do prevention efforts or if we could do rehabilitation, which I did help with in Iraq for the Detainee Rehabilitation Program. We had 20,000 detainees that we were trying to address. It's really important to understand. But what I learned, there's 112 Chechen suicide bombers, actually over that now, and we did psychological autopsies on over half of them. And they were 50% women, 50% men. The Chechens are unusual that they used women right away from the start. And we went to a close family member or a close associate and tried to understand, okay, this person was not born a terrorist. How did they become one? What put them on this terrorist trajectory? And when I looked at these two brothers and heard that they had come from Chechnya, right away, I said to myself, they had to be exposed to war trauma, even if they didn't live through it. And now we have stories that they were in Kyrgyzstan and they went back to Chechnya but didn't stay because the first war broke out. And Tamerlan's Kyrgyz kindergarten teacher says he was reactive to firecrackers, and she attributed that to war trauma. So we know that they had exposure, plus Tamerlan went back to Dagestan, and Dagestan and Ingushetia is where the Chechen conflict spread to. So it's actually more active in Dagestan and Ingushetia now than it was in Chechnya. And so when I look at terrorism from my 10 years of studying it, there's always a group, there's always an ideology that justifies for your cause, and I don't agree with this, but the argument is always for your cause, you can murder innocent civilians. And then there's some degree of social support, and there's a vulnerable individual. We had all four of those things in this case, and we get the lethal cocktail of terrorism.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you say, at least with regard to these two, when you say they weren't born terrorists, that's quite possible. But, you know, for instance, in the Palestinian territories, they teach their kids from the time they could understand words, you know, kill the Jew, take Jerusalem with your blood. They celebrate suicide bombers by naming soccer fields and stadiums after them. So, you know, they run little Hezbollah and Hamas camps for kids. They dress with the fake bomb belts on them. So that maybe, you know, maybe that's a unique situation, but certainly there we know why it's easy to become a terrorist. But I you know, the Chechenian thing, the Chechenian connection, I believe, is only half of it, or I don't know what percentage of it, but a major part is something you didn't mention, I don't think, is the radical Islam and jihad. I mean,
Right.
you know, the United States can't be held responsible for what's going on with Russia and Chechnya. Certainly, they can't feel by blowing up an 8-year-old boy in America it's going to help the Chechnyan cause in any way. They had to probably also feel that they were doing what either the Quran told them to do, or this was jihad, or they're going to be rewarded for doing this based on their religious beliefs. That's the center around all the Muslim bombings, is their religious beliefs.
Well, let's look back at the four things. The ideology in this case is the militant jihad. The group, I think, is Al-Qaeda. I don't think it's the Chechen group only. And as you probably well know, Al-Qaeda infiltrated the Chechen uprisings. It was a secular uprising in 1991, but it quickly changed to a militant jihadi ideology and to a Chechen jihad between the two wars, when Saudi Khattab brought that ideology into the Chechen conflict. And that's when they began doing suicide operations. And you're right, there's a great deal of social support for terrorism in the West Bank and Gaza. And we don't see that as much in other places, but Dagestan is another place where you might see that it would be very possible to rub shoulders very easily with other extremists and get a lot of social support for attacking the West. And along with this ideology, if you look on it on a global level, not just the Chechen variant of it, on a global level, when a Muslim has violated their own faith and then reverted back to it and reverted into an extremist form, they can turn around and sickly blame the West, saying, you corrupted me, now I must destroy you. And we're seeing that these kids were smoking weed, doing all kinds of things that don't go at all with being an extremist Muslim. So
well, yeah, and
that's part of it as well.
And of course, you know, you listen to the mother, who, among other statements, and you know, it's no wonder she's not coming back here. I'm surprised the Russians haven't grabbed her. The mother who made a statement that, in addition to that, the bombings were fake and the blood was really paint, and you know, the FBI killed my sons and it was set up. She also said they killed one son. I don't care if they kill the other son. I don't care if they kill me. I'll shout Allah Akbar. I think that's very, very telling.
I'm not sure about her. I'm still reserving judgment because I've seen clips of Palestinian parents that were very hysterical. But then when I interviewed them later, when I went through the West Bank and Gaza, they were in terrible grief and blamed the terrorist organizations for taking advantage of their children. And in her part of the world, that the FSB might set you up for something, that's quite common. People get arrested in Russia with drugs suddenly introduced into their trunks, guns, and there's even an argument about one of the apartment buildings that was bombed outside of Moscow, that there's arguments whether the Chechens even did it, if their own government didn't do it. And, you know, we're dealing with dirty players here. So her hysteria for her part of the world and her doubts about, you know, just thinking her sons are innocent, I don't know. I'm reserving judgment on that.
Well, like I said, but she's all over the. I mean, she cried. She lamented. Well, why did I ever come to the United States? These are on separate days. And then, of course, there was the statement which I've played on the air, and like I just described to you. I don't care if they kill me. I don't care if they kill. And this wasn't the immediate reaction. This was after a few days, and then she said Allah Akbar at the end of it, and then she reverted back to, you know, the thing was a fake. And so she's been all over the map. But let me ask you, and we're talking to Dr. Ann Speckhard, professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical School, author of Talking to Terrorists?
That's right,
okay.
Talking to Terrorists.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what about, you know, tell me what the difference is. I mean, there's probably a million, especially based on the four factors that you point out and discuss. But, you know, I pointed out Robert Redford was interviewed on Good Morning America slightly before the bombing took place about his movie, which celebrates the Weather Underground. And he was asked by George Stephanopoulos, and we played this soundbite, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's almost a direct quote. Stephanopoulos asked him, were you a supporter? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I not only sympathize with them, I empathize with them. And he said, but you knew about the bombs and the violence. He said, all of it. And he said, sometimes you got to have violence. Now, you know, so I asked the question, and Alan Dershowitz agreed with me, and it became big news. I mean, what's the difference, really? I mean, the ideology might be different, the reasoning might be different, but, you know, you got President Obama, who started his political career and served on a board or two with William Ayers. You got the FALN terrorists let out of prison basically by Eric Holder and Bill Clinton. They were caught making and planting bombs in the U.S. after they had already blown up buildings and killed people, maybe not those specific people. He went to them and said, don't you want clemency? And they were released by Bill Clinton and Eric Holder. I mean, what's the difference between the FALN, the Weather Underground, and these Chechenian bombers here?
You bring up a really good point, Steve. And sometimes people get confused about terrorism, and they get confused the cause with the tactic. The tactic is always wrong. I don't care how good your cause is. And Robert Redford might have really agreed with their cause, but their tactic of blowing up civilians and blowing up buildings. I went to the University of Wisconsin, where they blew up a building there as well, the underground.
Right, yes.
And a physics professor, all his life work was blown up. Thank God he wasn't in the building, but it's always wrong, no matter how good your cause is, to attack civilians. And people get confused about that. You'll talk to people that feel sorry for the Palestinians. You'll talk to people that feel sorry for this, feel sorry for that. But it's never right.
Right, and once you justify, once you say, Oh, they're legitimate. That's a good call. You're absolutely right. Once you say what Redford said, or what anybody says about any bombing or any act of violence against civilians, targeting civilians, then you could just as well easily say, well, then that's what the Al-Qaeda terrorists who flew the planes into the buildings thought. They felt they were legitimate. I mean, if you're going to allow one, then you've got to allow all.
Exactly. And all of our religions in the main condemn it. Islam condemns attacking civilians, Judaism, Christianity. It's just
well, not all of Islam doesn't condemn it.
No,
Radical Islam, no.
Exactly. The Takfiri, sick, distorted view is something that we need to do away with.
But also, you know, if a cartoon comes out interpreted against Muhammad, or you know, look what's happened. People have had their heads chopped off because they didn't like it was in a magazine or in a movie. And you know, riots in the streets, people killed, pillaged, raped. I mean, in reaction to something that allegedly, you know, diminishes the Prophet Muhammad or treats Islam in a bad manner, or someone who converts away from Islam, they're often killed. I mean, that's all too common. That's not just Al-Qaeda. That's more mainstream.
Well, you're talking about some countries that are still very backward, and it's a concern. And you know, I don't know what to say about it except that it's awful.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm glad to hear you say what you said about any act of violence against any civilian, no matter what the quote-unquote cause, is equally wrong, and I appreciate it. And thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, Steve.
All right, take care. Sorry I got the name wrong. Dr. Ann Speckhard, a professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University, and Talking to Terrorists is the name of the book.